The Beatles have countless hits, and they're all vastly different. There are ballads, experimental tracks, and even what many people consider the first heavy metal song in history. Few people would think about "You Know My Name, Look Up the Number" when asked to name a Beatles song, but this deep cut meant a lot for the band even if they only released it as a B-side. True, it's not a masterpiece like Yesterday or A Day in the Life, but the process of making it was very sentimental, particularly for John Lennon and Paul McCartney. When people discuss the greatest songs in the Beatles' catalog, they usually focus on the works that changed popular music forever. Songs such as Hey Jude, Strawberry Fields Forever, Something, and Let It Be tend to dominate those conversations. Yet sometimes a song's importance cannot be measured by chart positions, critical acclaim, or musical complexity. Sometimes its value comes from the memories attached to it. That is precisely what happened with You Know My Name, Look Up the Number. While casual listeners often overlook it, the track occupies a unique place in Beatles history. It serves as a rare snapshot of Lennon and McCartney simply enjoying each other's company, creating music without pressure, expectations, or artistic ambitions. In a catalog filled with groundbreaking achievements, this quirky novelty song stands out because it captured something increasingly rare during the band's final years: pure fun. It's no secret that during the last years of the band, the relationship between the songwriting partners soured. Creative and personal disagreements got in the way, but they never stopped caring about each other. And even among those tensions, there were good moments where their beautiful friendship still thrived. This song is the perfect example of one of those moments, and that's why the band members have such fond memories of it, even if it didn't have great success. By the late 1960s, the Beatles were no longer the inseparable unit that had conquered the world earlier in the decade. Business disputes, artistic differences, and the pressures of fame had begun to create divisions within the group. Lennon was increasingly focused on his relationship with Yoko Ono and his own artistic pursuits, while Paul McCartney often pushed the band to maintain its productivity. George Harrison was growing frustrated with the limited space available for his songwriting, and Ringo Starr occasionally found himself caught in the middle. Despite these challenges, the emotional bond that connected Lennon and McCartney remained remarkably strong. They had spent years writing songs together, traveling together, and experiencing unprecedented success side by side. Even when disagreements became common, there were still moments that reminded them of their earlier friendship. You Know My Name, Look Up the Number became one of those reminders. You Know My Name, Look Up the Number officially came out in 1970, but it was years in the making. It was recorded in 3 sessions in 1967, and then it was shelved for a long time. According to John Lennon, they had written it as a joke and didn't think it would go anywhere. The timing is significant because 1967 was one of the most creative periods in Beatles history. The band had recently released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and was experimenting with new sounds, recording techniques, and musical ideas. In the midst of all that innovation, Lennon somehow became fascinated by an incredibly simple phrase he spotted by accident. "That was a piece of unfinished music that I turned into a comedy record with Paul," he said in David Sheff's book, All We Are Saying. The source of inspiration was incredibly ordinary and unexpected. "I was waiting for him in his house, and I saw the phone book was on the piano with You Know the Name, Look Up the Number. That was like a logo, and I just changed it." The story perfectly reflects Lennon's sense of humor. Throughout his career, he had a talent for finding inspiration in unlikely places. While many songwriters searched for profound themes, Lennon could transform a mundane phrase from a telephone directory into the foundation for a Beatles recording. The song is not complex, it just repeats the same phrase over and over in what resembles a mambo tempo. They resumed working on the song during the Abbey Road sessions in 1969. It didn't end up getting released as a single for that album, but as a B-side for their last release, Let It Be. It was almost released as a single for Lennon's first solo album, but eventually they made it work as a Beatles track. George Harrison and Ringo Starr weren't present at the last session, and it allowed Lennon and McCartney to have one last peaceful moment together before their bitter feud started. Nick Webb, a sound engineer who worked with them, recalled the significance of the moment. The recording itself became a playground for absurd humor. Lennon and McCartney experimented with voices, characters, and exaggerated performances. The song shifts unexpectedly between styles and moods, sounding sometimes more like a comedy sketch than a traditional Beatles recording. That was precisely the point. The pair weren't trying to create another chart-topping masterpiece, they were entertaining themselves. John and Paul weren't always getting along that well at this time, but for this song they went out on the studio floor and sang together around one microphone. Even at this time, I was thinking, what are they doing with this old 4-track tape, recording these funny bits onto this quaint song? But it was a fun track to do. Webb's recollection is especially touching because it highlights something that had become increasingly uncommon. During a period when tensions often dominated Beatles sessions, Lennon and McCartney briefly returned to the chemistry that defined their partnership from the beginning. For a few hours, the conflicts disappeared, replaced by laughter and creative spontaneity. In his book, McCartney, A Life in Lyrics, Paul McCartney claims not to have a favorite song of his, but he admitted to having a soft spot for this unusual track, not necessarily because he thought it was the best, but because of the memories associated with it. He still remembers when John Lennon first brought up the idea to him and how fun it was working on it with his best friend. When talking about You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, he said it was probably my favorite Beatles track. That statement surprises many fans because McCartney has written some of the most celebrated songs in music history. Yet his affection for this forgotten B-side reveals how artists often evaluate their work differently than audiences do. Fans may judge songs based on musical quality, while the creators remember the experiences behind them. It's so insane, all the memories. I mean, what would you do if a guy like John Lennon turned up at the studio and said, "I've got a new song"? I said, "What's the words?" And he replied, "You know my name, look up the number." I asked, "What's the rest of it?" No other words. Those are the words. And I want to do it like a mantra." McCartney's recollection captures exactly why the song remains special to him. It transported him back to an earlier era when he and Lennon were simply two young friends fascinated by the possibilities of music. Before the lawsuits, before the arguments, before the pressures of being Beatles, there was just the joy of creating something together. No Beatles fan would choose this song as the best Lennon-McCartney piece. McCartney probably wouldn't either, despite calling it his favorite. But even when it comes to the greatest songwriters of all time, perfection is not always the answer. John Lennon and Paul McCartney started writing together when they were teenagers, just experimenting and having fun. This song was a glimpse into that old innocence that seemed lost after Beatlemania exploded, and that alone makes it special. In many ways, You Know My Name, Look Up the Number is less important as a song than as a document of friendship. It reminds listeners that behind the legendary partnership were two people who genuinely enjoyed making each other laugh. Long before they became cultural icons, they were simply John and Paul. That spirit survives throughout the recording. Hidden beneath the silliness, the repeated lyrics, and the intentionally ridiculous performances is a rare moment of authenticity. It may never rank among the greatest Beatles songs, but it captures something equally valuable: the sound of Lennon and McCartney enjoying each other's company one last time before the end of an extraordinary chapter in music history.